Hello and welcome back to McClaren Performance. Two top teams in Liverpool and Man City are facing some turbulent times at the moment. They're both falling in different ways, but is it really the end of their reign at the top? There's a great quote from Erik ten Hag. It's been going around for quite a while now. Man City, Liverpool have had their time, but eras do come to an end. He seems to be a bit of a magic man at the moment, knowing exactly what's going to happen to Liverpool and Man City, because like he said really at the start of the season, for both teams it really hasn't been going to plan. And with other teams around him, Arsenal, Man United, Newcastle, teams that are really bolstering what they've got at the moment, it seems like teams like Liverpool, like Man City, it's the end of an era for them. Past 5, maybe 7 years have been exactly what they've wanted, and they've dominated in a lot of different ways. But this season especially, it just has that feeling that everything's finite, and that's looking pretty different for both teams. I mean, just start off with Liverpool. Where they are in the table, it's nowhere near where they want to be. Performances haven't been good enough. There's been a number of times in the season where I think a lot of people have felt they're going to get those performances back, they're going to win some games, and they just don't do it. I mean, the most recent example is coming into 2023, thinking that they'll get their form back up, but it really hasn't been the case. It seems like from the media, from the outside, from in the club also, nobody really has a clear idea of where this downfall is coming from. I mean, there's a number of different places I guess you could point to. Something I mentioned in the last episode is their lack of midfield. I mean, they have players like James Milner, Jordan Henderson, that have been around for a long time, and there's not really been a fresh face in there. The personnel in defence has always looked pretty similar as well. Andy Robertson, Trent Alexander-Arnold, individuals that have been in those positions for the past, I'd argue, maybe 4 or 5 seasons. Not just the personnel that have been the same, but the way of playing has also been the same as well. It's also a way of playing that requires a lot of intensity. It's dynamic, the ball moving, people running, got wing-backs coming forward all the time. I think one interesting point is, how long can you keep that up? The real psychological aspect that I look at is the idea that a team kind of does have its life cycle. There's something that's utilised quite a lot in psychology and maybe business, everything like that. It's kind of like the 5 stages of a team's development. You have the forming, the storming, the norming, the performing, and then lastly the adjourning. And that is kind of the cycle of any team. I think it's quite interesting that Jurgen Klopp, in the 2 clubs that he was managers before, he had a similar lifespan, a similar kind of 7-year period. And you could maybe argue from that maybe is the lifespan of what a team is, especially under Jurgen Klopp. But in Liverpool's case specifically, last season, you could argue really, in a lot of players' mind, and everyone's mind really, was the climax of the highest they were ever really going to get. They were competing for 4 different trophies at the same time. An incredible place to be in, and they didn't quite make it for a number of those things, but still probably the highest and the best they've ever looked, really. And I think if you're a player, at least subconsciously, I think you look at everything. We all, and psychologically, we do look at life as a narrative, and we look at life through stories. There is a beginning, there is an end, and I think sometimes if you're a Liverpool player, and you've played for so long under Jurgen Klopp, you put all that energy, that intensity in your game. At some point, that has to come to an end. It comes to an end in a physical sense because maybe the players get older, they can't keep up with the physical demands of what is required of playing football, specifically what is required of playing in Jurgen Klopp's team. But I think also from a psychological one also, where is that narrative now for Liverpool? They have done everything that they can. They have won the Premier League. They've won the Champions League. That is what they aim to do. And it's maybe somewhat drifting towards the need for a new era, a new time, a new story to be told with new players. And you could argue that Jurgen Klopp really hasn't made that transition very well. You have to give him the benefit of doubt a little bit. At the start of the season, I didn't predict Liverpool to do so badly. I don't think anybody did. I think we expected them to carry on the same way that they were before. You think of a Sir Alex Ferguson at Manchester United, someone who could transition the team. And if you look at Manchester United, they did different eras of different notable teams, maybe 2 or 3 really, that Sir Alex Ferguson kind of managed to transition into, and each time he would be able to change it up with different personnel. And it doesn't seem to be the case that Liverpool and Jurgen Klopp were able to do that. They've had very similar starting 11 for such a long time. You could argue now really that they are in that transitional period. For example, bringing in players like Nunes. He's someone who obviously has a lot of talent. He has that ability, but he's not played in the Premier League before. He arguably maybe needs that season now to get into the rhythm of things, to understand the game, and he definitely does have a lot of potential, but that is a transition, and maybe it's not a transition that's been handled very well. And maybe that is a weakness of Jurgen Klopp, that he's never been able to show that transition, that ability to move a team on, to move on to that next story, that next narrative, to have players come in with fresh motivation and to integrate them well into how he wants to play, or even change up how he wants to play. But I think just off the pitch also, a possible change in ownership as well. There's been some grumblings about the owners at Liverpool, but I mean, looking at the outside, they've done a pretty good job. They don't put so much money in. They get a lot out of it, and I think that's what they should be doing, and that's what good owners are. They run a club very well, and they have done with Jurgen Klopp there, and transitioning from that ownership as well will be different. As we're seeing, say, with Todd Bowley, it doesn't necessarily mean if you get a lot of money coming in that it's going to fix problems straight away. And with Liverpool's ownership changing, if someone buys that club, I don't think that necessarily means that they're going to be a much better team. I think probably they will look back at the Jurgen Klopp era still. So it's arguably an end for Liverpool that isn't being transitioned very well. Manchester City is a much different story. There's some aspect to that where they have similar players for such a long time. Their story comes to an end at some point, and it seems to be coming to an end in a smaller sort of way, not necessarily on the pitch with regards to what's going on with performances, although that hasn't been fantastic, and it seems like teams like Arsenal are doing much better and probably going to show much more longevity. Also, in Manchester City's case, there's much more things going off the pitch, things going wrong there especially. I mean, I'm no expert on that side of things, but everything does look incredibly suspicious. So that's about it. I think the moral of the story of both teams really is that performance will always come in waves. There will always be those moments where you perform at your best, and then there will also be times where you then lose that and it comes backwards and forwards again and again. And I think there has to be some level of acceptance of that. Sometimes you have a Sir Alex Ferguson who can manage those waves well and can manage those transitions well, but that's not always going to be the case, and I think there's always an up and down, and somewhat an acceptance of that is probably the best thing. Can't be 100% all the time. Liverpool can't perform out of their skins every season for infinity. It just won't happen. But the main lesson for any manager, team, is to always learn, to always improve, to always change, to always adapt, to always grow from what you're doing. That is where consistency comes from. It's the best way to manage the tide, the waves of the being good, being bad. That change, that developing, that always wanting to improve is the one thing that would give you that consistency going forward. Maybe Erik ten Hag knew that all along. You know, eras come to an end, and these ones inevitably are, and hopefully Manchester United take advantage of that. But yeah, thank you for watching and listening. What do you think? A lot of Manchester United people watch and listen to this, so I imagine you're pretty happy about Liverpool Man City's situation. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't watched before. Leave a review as well if you're listening, and yeah, I'll see you again next week.